When I was a kid, I remember playing Rollercoaster Tycoon, and specifically in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, there's a level called Extreme Heights, in which a coaster shoots majestically over the park entrance. I was so enamored by this that I, like any kid would, began replicating something similar on any park that I could squeeze it into. And then, in 2013, Cedar Fair decided to take this video game concept and make it a reality by adding in the Gatekeeper. This winged coaster makes not just a single inversion, but two inversions directly overtop the newly created park entrance. I was just as enamored by this at its launch as I was with Extreme Heights when I first saw it. After all, nothing screams roller coaster capital of the world than by doing something in direct response to the inner child of me and so many like me. Gatekeeper, in my opinion, is the absolute pinnacle of an iconic entrance. So, if that's what I think, then what's up with the title of this video? Well, the truth is, it's a little bit deeper than that. While the actual entrance, that being the building where your tickets are scanned, which includes Gatekeeper's iconic keyholes, is great, pretty much everything else about the entrance could be improved. I believe that when you take your first steps through those gates, it needs to make a statement. Those gates should be a gateway from the normal world into something truly otherworldly. And while Cedar Point's gateway is excellent, the problem lies in that the world you step into just inside the gates is nothing short of entirely lackluster. I had a commenter on my last video call it a county fair on steroids, which is honestly a pretty interesting way to describe it. So we're going to break down just what the problems are and how Cedar Point could fix them to make Cedar Point's entrance truly something incredible. The primary issue with the entrance is that it just doesn't have a massive amount of anything going on with it. I'm a firm believer in that those first steps into the park should make a bold statement, and I think Cedar Point simply doesn't do that. Truly, other than the decently placed merry-go-round and the sign in front of it, there is basically nothing else at all happening in the entrance. On the right side of the entrance is the guest services building, which then folds into rentable lockers behind it, which flows directly into the restrooms and then Ocean Motion. Ocean Motion is bordered on its far side by a pathway that used to lead to a few stores over to the former location of Pink's and the Mac Shack, but that's since closed, leaving only the entrance to Ocean Motion in that area. Finally, this side of the entrance is finished off with the Cedar Point store. Notably, on this side is the massive amount of concrete and the fairly open design. The restrooms are set way back off the entrance, and Ocean Motion leaves the area feeling unweighted on this side. The pirate ship ride provides some movement, but from the perspective of setting a great first impression, it doesn't really do much. It leaves the entire side feeling mostly empty, with the primary first impression of this side of the park being empty space. The left side of the entrance doesn't improve much. Directly to the left is a small building for both lost items and people, aka the Lost and Found. Beyond that is a drink stand named only the Redemption Center, which stays closed most of the time, only really to open typically on Saturday mornings. On either side of the Redemption Center is essentially empty space, spare for some seating on the far side for the French Quarter, which rounds out the left side of the entrance. While both sides suffer from unused space, the right side has its attractions pushed away from the entrance, while on this side, the Redemption Center sits at a perfectly appropriate distance, but there's a bunch of unused space beside it and behind it. The entire thing is just underwhelming, with the only real standout visually being the classic merry-go-round in the center. Otherwise, there is nothing about this entrance that transports you into another world, and I think we can do better. Before we get into reconstructing what the entrance could look like, let's first lay out what we need to achieve in this design. First, we want to maintain all of the existing functionality of the buildings that are currently in the entrance area. This means keeping the guest services building, lockers, lost and found, restrooms, and drink stand. Second, we want to provide a more unified theme to the entrance, making the entire area feel a little bit more cohesive. Third, we want to add some additional functionality and maybe a few features to make the entrance a more valuable area going forward. Finally, we want to add more of a wow factor when a guest enters the gates for the first time. We want that perfect photo opportunity, and we want to have the entrance give a better impression of what guests are in for once they enter the park. So, with that in mind, the first thing I want to do is close in a lot of the empty space, but pulling the visual line out to properly surround both sides of the merry-go-round. So what we're going to do to accomplish this is build multiple new buildings, and we'll dive into some of the styling and theming in a bit, but for now, let's walk through it. The current location of the guest services building will remain, but the building itself will be replaced with a 2-story facade. However, the lockers behind the guest services will be replaced with a new building that'll sell basic necessities such as suntan lotion, sunglasses, water bottles, and other things that a guest may need to get right as they enter the park. By moving these items up here, it can free up space in the other nearby shops while also being conveniently located directly next to guest services to make it one of the first stops of the day for first-timers. This store will open on the corner to an alleyway that leads into the bathroom building, which again will retain its location, but the building itself will be replaced with one that matches the styling of the new area. The alleyway will be closed off on the other side by replacing the Ocean Motion with another building complex. I've said before that I think the Ocean Motion's location in the park now is very strange, so I think we should move it elsewhere. And maybe somewhere on the river going around the Millennium Island is a long-term location that makes sense for this ride. Instead, along the alleyway will be an ice cream shop that replaces the old Toffs building further down the midway. Moving this shop up allows for us to use that space for something different farther down, especially considering there's a lot of open space down there. It also begins to build a common string of buildings in this area, with the French Quarter opposite it. Rounding the corner from the ice cream shop brings us to the coffee shop, which is formed for moving the Starbucks from down the midway and bringing it forward. I think by moving it up in the park, we can continue to add to our common string of buildings with now the French Quarter, ice cream, and coffee all within feet of each other, forming a kind of triangle of goodies. And again, we'll come back to what we'll do with the existing building soon. The coffee shop then folds into another corner that forms a second alleyway where the current entrance to Ocean Motion is. As I stated earlier, this used to be walkable all the way back to the Mac Shack, so my intention is to make this area walkable once again, but by adding various shops along the way. I'm going to call this alley Education Ave, and here's why. On the right side of Education Ave, in the same complex as the coffee and ice cream shop, would be the entrance to a new attraction, which is a coaster education center. I think of this kind of like a science center to teach kids all about the physics of the kind of rides that are in the park and the safety features, how they work, and more. This would be a unique indoor attraction, not too dissimilar, but still unique from the museum. And that would allow people to step out of the weather and into an attraction while simultaneously adding a completely new, family-friendly experience that would also require relatively low staffing compared to a ride of similar size. This attraction would take up most of the size of the old Ocean Motion lot, and then would have an exit through a new shop, which I'm calling the bookstore. Cedar Point already sells books in some of its other shops, but I thought it would be unique to actually utilize the opportunity of the Coaster Education Center to hopefully spark people's interest in the design and creation of rides, theme parks, and entertainment. And then they could exit into a store that serves as kind of a monument to that field. The store would not only sell books, but potentially artwork, all related to roller coasters, theme parks, and this field of entertainment. The final store on this side of the alleyway would be the Fun Picks store, which again would be relocated from further down the midway to free up more space in that area. On the left side of Education Ave, the current Point Plaza store would remain, but would get a complete remodel. The building itself would be redesigned to match the styling of the other buildings in the area, and the store itself will be broken up into multiple smaller stores that are all interconnected. This allows each store to retain a smaller focus, which helps theming, can improve guests' ability to find what they're looking for, and also allows more entrances and exits to be added. I'd like to see at least 2 more doors placed in the alleyway for this store, breaking up into 4 quadrants. Perhaps the quadrants could sell clothing in one, plushies and toys in another, souvenirs like magnets and pins in another. These stores would all have different names, and the building would have different facades for each entrance to make the single store visually feel like separate stores. Moving across the gate to the other side of the merry-go-round now, as stated before, I think we can keep the French Quarter as is. However, the area around the current drink stand will have buildings erected all around it, pulling that empty space forward and making it all visually spaced evenly. In this area would be the Lost and Found, which can now be a little bit larger with this layout, and the existing drink stands, which can become a bit larger while also becoming indoors, which make it a prime candidate for a new freestyle machine stand. And also in this area would be the lockers that we moved from the other side of the gate. These lockers would now be indoors, and because of that, there's potential that the park could charge a small premium for these lockers, since people could store temperature-sensitive items in them, like potentially makeup or sticks of deodorant. Also in this line of buildings would be the entrance to a new attraction. This would potentially be a dark ride, like I've described in one of my previous videos, that utilizes the empty space in the picnic area and unused building area behind this line of buildings. This new ride would then make it officially a second new attraction in this entrance area, and with both of them being indoors, it adds a much needed variety to Cedar Point's lineup in a way that doesn't interfere with any of their existing areas very much. These would be a huge boon to the park as a whole, as well as to this area. This ride would then exit in the current pathway between the theater and the old Fun Picks building on the back of Hugo's. One thing I've always felt really doesn't have the most magnificent station is the entrance to the Sky Ride. I'd like to take the Sky Ride and completely reimagine this entrance. The structure itself would be expanded into a new building that could be themed maybe like a train station. Imagine it kind of like a central station, but instead of a train being in the center of the station, the Sky Ride is. This new building would stretch the entirety of the midway, enclosing the facade of the now vacant Starbucks building and the vacant Fun Picks building on the other side. Also, remember that dark ride exit is right in an alleyway that would dump into the station, giving us an opportunity to enclose the alley and turn it into a ride exit gift shop alongside the Fun Picks building. The Starbucks and ice cream vacant buildings would be given a new facade as a singular structure, and then turned into a new dining experience with an entrance from either the front in this station or in the back from Education Ave. This train station would provide a much needed indoor area for people to escape the heat, and more importantly, give a logical endpoint for the design area that we are working in. Speaking of design, let's talk about that next. One of the major points of this layout is to help solve a problem that I'm calling the walk. Other parks aren't immune to the walk, but I find it somewhat egregious in Cedar Point. The walk is a design issue in the park where once you enter, you really have to walk a pretty significant distance to actually reach the virtual gateway where guests would actually reach the main portion of the park. In good park design, this gateway is usually designed in coordination with some kind of focal point in mind. You can think of this focal point often as the thing that people take their photo in front of when they visit the park. And this is fairly common. Magic Kingdom's gateway is the end of Main Street, with the focal point being the castle. Kings Island's gateway is International Street, with their focal point being the Eiffel Tower. In Cedar Point's case, I think a large part of the reason that the commenter described the entrance as a county fair on steroids is because of the poor execution of these two elements. As the park currently exists, the focal point of the entrance is meant to be the carousel in the center of the midway. However, the problem is that the carousel is rather short, and as are many of the surrounding structures. And Ocean Motion even leaves a large amount of open space on one side. This openness provides an eye line to the coasters in the distance, which, in comparison, dwarf the carousel, making it feel much less impactful as a focal point. So people's attention is instead drawn to the rides in the distance, except there isn't a very exciting path to get to any of these rides, other than to journey all the way down the midway. This means that the virtual gateway to the rest of the park really doesn't happen until you get past the Sky Ride entrance, where you can then actively see the entrance to the Raptor, the first actual coaster entrance visitors encounter in the park. The overshadowed focal point, open spaces, and lackluster walk to the gateway into the real park area, I think makes the walk feel more like a chore than an adventure, and this contributes largely to that feeling of the entrance feeling underwhelming. So this is one of the biggest design problems we're trying to solve. First, pulling everything forward brings a much needed sense of balance and symmetry to the park entrance that didn't exist before, with both sides feeling more equally weighted. And second, by pulling everything forward, we are making the entrance feel more claustrophobic without actually making a significant change to the useful area. This will make the park feel more full by comparison, similar to how the same meal on 2 plates will appear to be bigger on a smaller plate. Next, by making every facade 2 stories, it will make the entrance feel more grand, as building height can be mentally correlated with expense. Finally, and most importantly, it redirects attention and eyeline. By heightening all of the surrounding buildings and moving them in closer, it changes the visibility of the other portions of the park from this area. This in itself is a multifaceted design tool. First, it helps isolate guests in this area, hiding the rides in the distance from view and making this area essentially its own mini world within the park. It makes this significantly more immersive. Next, since the skyline beyond is hidden and all of the buildings are relatively the same height, it redirects our attention to the one structure that is actually a different height, which is now our focal point, the carousel. With this new design, the carousel would actually stand out as the centerpiece in this entire area, with the Skyride station providing a nice backdrop for the carousel from the distance, but not in a way that actually draws attention away from it. This design also helps us solve the gateway problem as well. By adding the train station style building around the Skyride, it visually and mentally cuts off the rest of the park completely from this entrance area. This effectively means that the Skyride station becomes the virtual gateway, or maybe even can thought of as the second entrance into the park. We can bring a lot of character, consistency, and theming to this area as well to really draw it to completion. For the design of the buildings, I think Cedar Point would need to walk a fine line. Their gate and existing buildings already follow this very modern aesthetic that I think they would need to match with these new buildings. But I also think that this area is something they need to build with at minimum a 50-year time span in mind. So understanding how design trends change, I think they need to avoid going with anything too trendy. I'd also like to see this area tie into a more cohesive park-wide theme, something I really think Cedar Point needs. As far as that park-wide theme goes, I actually think they could play into the park's location out on the water and really go for that beachside theme. To fit this area into that, I actually think a clever design would be to theme this area on the beachside resorts that you'd find in places like Miami, Myrtle Beach, or Cedar Point. Down on the ground, the first order of business would be to give an entirely new paving job to the front entrance, utilizing a pair of asphalt driveways that flank either side of the carousel and continue down the midway through the station. These driveways would be surrounded by pavers. The asphalt being solely directional would help steer people's movements down the midway, ultimately through that desired virtual gateway into the rest of the park, by giving a visual sense of direction, while pavers would give a great sense of contrast and a touch of luxury to the rest of the pavement. I think we could add some visual interest as well as some shade by putting in art pieces above the streets of our 2 alleyways. In the education alley, they could use a kind of string lights like we've seen in the back half of the park to bring it to life at night. But for the restroom alley, I'd love to bring in that sense of roller coaster capital of the world history by building a miniature roller coaster track that jumps between the rooftops. However, I like the idea of this fake track jumping along the top of the Education Center building and ending at the doorway, which could make this fake track serve as both a decoration and also a way to draw attention to the attraction. Back down on the street, of course, we could fill the streets with umbrella tables, benches, street vendors, and more. The last thing to talk about, of course, is the fact that there's basically no chance Cedar Point would do this. Unfortunately, while I think this would be the right direction, the problem on Cedar Point's part is that an investment like this would cost upwards of $20 to $30 million, not including the dark ride, which is the price for which they could build a brand new, award-winning roller coaster. And with the entrance, there isn't a ton they can do in the way of marketing, so it's too large an investment for them to make without a direct path to an ROI. Regardless, it's a really fun exercise, and just because the entire thing isn't that realistic, it doesn't mean there's not things to learn from design charrettes like this. My big hope from conversations like this is that Cedar Point management would do similar exercises like this to figure out what their ideal version of Cedar Point would look like, and then distill their ideas into real, actionable steps that they can take to make it so that 100 years from now, the park will have taken the little baby steps to transform into their vision. And that's it for today's video. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Looking forward to your conversation. And don't forget that you are beautifully and wonderfully made, and you are loved. See you next time.